The beautiful names of Allah. In the name of Allah, the Merciful, the Compassionate. Allah, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Merciful, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Compassionate, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Sovereign, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Holy, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Perfect, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Guardian of Faith, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Protector, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Mighty, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Omnipotent, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Most Great, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Creator, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Giver of Life, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Designer, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Forgiver, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Subduer, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Bestower, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Provider, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Great Reliever, whose greatness is above all greatness. The All-Knowing, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Straightener of Sustenance, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Expander of Sustenance, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Abaser, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Exalter, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Giver of Honor, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Disgracer, whose greatness is above all greatness. The All-Hearing, whose greatness is above all greatness. The All-Seeing, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Absolute Ruler, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Just, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Subtle, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Aware, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Tolerant, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Magnificent, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Forgiving, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Benefactor, whose greatness is above all greatness. The High, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Greatest, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Preserver, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Nourisher, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Reckoner, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Glorious, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Generous, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Observer, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Responder, whose greatness is above all greatness. The All-Embracing, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Wise, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Loving, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Majestic, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Resurrector, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Witness, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Truth, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Accomplisher, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Strong, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Firm, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Protecting Friend, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Praiseworthy, whose greatness is above all greatness. The counter, whose greatness is above all greatness. The originator, whose greatness is above all greatness. The reviver, whose greatness is above all greatness. The life giver, whose greatness is above all greatness. The giver of death, whose greatness is above all greatness. The living, whose greatness is above all greatness. The self-existing, whose greatness is above all greatness. The ever-living, whose greatness is above all greatness. The honorable, whose greatness is above all greatness. The unique, whose greatness is above all greatness. The one, whose greatness is above all greatness. The one who is not in need, whose greatness is above all greatness. The able, whose greatness is above all greatness. The all-powerful, whose greatness is above all greatness. The expeditor, whose greatness is above all greatness. The one who puts back, whose greatness is above all greatness. The first, whose greatness is above all greatness. The last, whose greatness is above all greatness. The manifest, whose greatness is above all greatness. The hidden, whose greatness is above all greatness. The governor, whose greatness is above all greatness. The supreme, whose greatness is above all greatness. The righteous, whose greatness is above all greatness. The acceptor of repentance, whose greatness is above all greatness. The avenger, whose greatness is above all greatness. The all-forgiving, whose greatness is above all greatness. The sympathetic, whose greatness is above all greatness. The eternal sovereign, whose greatness is above all greatness. The Lord of glory and nobility, whose greatness is above all greatness. The equitable, whose greatness is above all greatness. The assembler, whose greatness is above all greatness. The self-sufficient, whose greatness is above all greatness. The enricher, whose greatness is above all greatness. The giver, whose greatness is above all greatness. The withholder, whose greatness is above all greatness. The harm causer, whose greatness is above all greatness. The favorer, whose greatness is above all greatness. The light, whose greatness is above all greatness. The guide, whose greatness is above all greatness. The originator, whose greatness is above all greatness. The everlasting, whose greatness is above all greatness. The inheritor, whose greatness is above all greatness. The guide to the right path, whose greatness is above all greatness. The patient, whose greatness is above all greatness.